Last year I posted a two-part video about what I thought were my top 20 Donkey Kong Country levels from the original series. They garnered one of the largest responses I've received for my work on YouTube so far, and one of the first things people gravitated towards were the comments that I made regarding the soundtracks of the original trilogy. I implied that some tracks were my favorite in the series over and above standard classics that are held up as universal favorites. The responses people generally had ranged from confusion at how I could rate these higher than those to people putting forward their own favorites, and even some people asking if I would consider doing an actual top 10 video outlining what my other favorite tracks were. And if you know me, I can't go more than a year without doing up a Donkey Kong video, and since it's been just about a year, I figured I'd take those video requests to heart and start pawing through the SNES DKC game soundtracks to suss out which ones are my favorite. And for the record, yes, I'm aware that Snowman Gaming did this video first, but he also did the top whatever DKC levels first last year. Basically, what I'm saying is it wouldn't be a Donkey Kong video for me if it wasn't also a Snowman ripoff. He's used to it by now.
I'm Snowman Gaming, and I approve this message.
Also, I know I usually have a guest pick on these countdown lists, but I so rarely get to talk about music on my channel that I just kind of plowed through to the end and didn't even really think of it, so okay, on with the list. I am on the record as of last year as saying that this is my favorite DKC music track. I think I stand by that statement, but revisiting this piece and thinking about it as opposed to how it relates to the level built around it, I think it remains my favorite in the same way that I say that Riverside, Act, or Haken are my favorite bands when, you know, Rush is still a thing that exists. That is to say that I think this track is one of the best examples of a track built to serve the immediate needs of the moment in question. It does not have a sustained theme or any significant singable melody. It's not going to catch in your brain and dominate your idle humming or singing. In essence, it is not a memorable track, but it touches briefly on all of the ideas or effects that you would expect to hear when wandering a big ancient temple filled with mystery and unknowing. The low rumble of muted percussion punctuated by a panpipe effect used sparingly, almost as though it's exploring melodic ideas rather than playing an actual melody. Between the panpipes and what sounds like a xylophone of sorts, a melody presents itself, but it is unforgiving and chaotic, conveying the foreign nature of a long-lost world with traditions and customs that may never be known to us. Again, I don't see this track as memorable on its own. It is not a satisfying piece to listen to idly, but when compared to its gameplay counterparts, it winds up being so much of the experience. Playing levels like Millstone Mayhem, or even editing footage of these levels, leaves me wrapped in the effect that this music puts forward so well, lifting the game to be so much more in the moment. In this context, Voices in the Temple is my favorite track in the series, but for the purposes of this list, it clocks in at number 10. Treetop Tumble has one thing going for it: quiet majesty. If I had to choose one word to describe the Donkey Kong Country 3 soundtrack in its entirety, I would probably go with understated. A lot of energy gets left by the wayside, and a lot of sonic space goes unused throughout the music of this game. This is, in some cases, a bit of a drawback, but when it lands, it's scary how well it works out. Treetop Tumble is definitely one of the winning moments in this game. Its eerie, mystical approach sells everything about the stoic, old-growth trees we're climbing on and through, the muted light passing through a thick canopy of endless growth. Every minute I'm in a level using this track, I can't help but be perfectly aware that I am probably deep in a forest that, as a rule, the locals stay out of. There is definitely something going on out here in these woods that good God-fearing folk don't dare talking about if they know what's good for them. Strictly speaking, there isn't a whole lot to talk about in this track. I'd say that DKC3's music is less experimental overall than its two predecessors, which, again, kind of a drawback, but also makes for some interesting moments of just no-nonsense, this is what the level is like conveyance. I don't think that this track is super memorable and doesn't really stick with me outside of gameplay, but in the moment, Treetop Tumble is one of the most fitting and appropriate tracks in the DKC series for so many reasons, putting it squarely at number 9. The last boss fight in Donkey Kong Country 2 is one of the more magical moments from my gaming history, and the music is half the experience. There's a lot in this track that appeals to my background in heavy metal music. It's not the instrumentation that does it, but many of the conventions are all there, many of the ones used precisely to build tension and energy. A rapid-fire bass line introduces us to our opponent, and the action picks up as we are treated to a rhythmic treble line, building the tension of the moment with 16th notes played in offset syncopation soon after, joined by a straight rhythm subdividing it with 8th notes. We are treated to a moment's reprieve, as we hear a kind of sort of guitar solo, but all of the while we are waiting for the moment that the energy flows back to full intensity, plotting the song not unlike a scene in a film or in a book. If there's one thing about this track that disappoints me, it's how short it is. The whole thing clocks in at about half the amount of time that any of the other tracks last for, but it's still impressive to me how much they did manage to pack into that runtime. The most powerful moment of the affair for me is when the high energy rhythm lines cut out, allowing a languid, more flowing melody to carry the song along, creating breathing room and versatile pacing that keeps things interesting. I've always thought that video game game soundtracks needed more metal, but until the rest of the world sees the light, I'll settle for the next best thing. So, okay, I'm not sure anybody, including myself, was thinking that this track wouldn't end up on here, and yes, I'm aware that last year I said that Voices in the Temple was better than Stickerbush, but yeah, like I said, Voices is really only mostly effective with the gameplay present. Like much of the rest of DKC2's soundtrack, Stickerbush Symphony has a strong melodic presence that helps it stand out as its own piece of music, with a shocking amount of range. So weirdly enough, I kind of see this track as opposite of Voices in the Temple. I think it's better removed from gameplay. The decision to go with a languid, sorrowful call and response instead of some kind of suspenseful edge of the seat grabber or menacing rumble of the dramatic is a huge part of this track's power. These are some of the most straight up challenging levels in the game. You can't touch the walls or the floors most of the time, and yet the music just calmly and without issue reminds you that this is nature in all of its majesty. Even if the skybound thorns and brambles aren't welcoming to us adventurers, the awesome power of nature doesn't care, and the sweeping motion of this beautiful melody is almost a celebration of itself, quiet, somber regard for its own power over us. Needlessly flowery language aside, Stickerbush Symphony is a really strong contender for one of my favorite VGM tracks, but it does kind of bother me how easily this track separates itself from its environment. There is nothing wrong with a track that can detach from its surroundings, but when it feels almost like it should, that's a bit of a drawback for me. That's what Stickerbush Symphony is, a staggeringly strong piece of music that doesn't seem to care what it's set to. I mean, I'm not sure what kind of musical tone a cloying Hellscape of Thorns is supposed to imply or be set to, so yeah, go for it, I guess. But this track seems to exist purely for itself and nothing else. So I love it, but beyond its established connotations, I think the functionality of some of the other tracks of the series come off as somewhat stronger in my mind. So I hope we can still be friends, even if I put Stickerbush Symphony at number 7. Minimalism is a hard thing to pull off when writing music, and yet it's exactly the kind of thing that you need to strive for when writing backing music for stuff like this. Originality and novelty is something that often needs to be sacrificed in the face of functionality, less so for video games, because you still often have extended periods of running around and getting stuff done. Leave it to Mr. Wise to figure out how to absolutely nail the minimalistic requirements put in place by the need to not be distracting, but still manage to have the work turn out to be painfully original and the kind of product some composers would work their entire careers to achieve. Echoey percussion starts us on our caving journey, accompanied early on by arrhythmic droplets of water shimmering out into the seemingly empty sonic space. Before long, we begin to hear sorrowful drawn-out keyboard patches begin to climb up and down the key that we're working in, while shrill tones pick and choose their contributions as though hiding and only showing themselves when an intruder has moved on. What is most impressive in this track is the sheer depth it conveys, and I'm not just talking about the echoey effect of the water droplets or washed-out draw of the melodic instruments. There is almost no mid-range in this song. We either have low droning pads or quick fleeting hints of melody. We are only given 2 or at times 3 elements of the piece at the very most at a time, creating periodic absence of percussion lines or melody. With no solid through line in this piece, we don't have anything to latch onto sonically, and we are often left wanting. In a lot of ways, we are not just imagining empty space, we are hearing it. Cave Dwellers is probably the least singable piece of music present in the DKC soundtracks, but when people hold up the environmental music design as a strength of the series, this track should be displayed front and center. It's one of the best, and it's number 6. I didn't think there was going to be a lot of DKC3 on this list. Like I've brought up before, the music is less chaotic, less adventurous in a lot of ways, and more based on your traditional songwriting structures and conventions. But I listened through the whole of the DKC3 soundtrack for good measure, and what I came to realize was how well that the music in this game, when detached from the visuals, still managed to convey exactly what was going on in the mind's eye. I'm not going to say that the first 2 games relied on weird sound effects in the mix to convey atmosphere, because that wouldn't be fair. The style of those games is not in question. But despite what I feel the DKC3 soundtrack lacks, tracks like this are an example of raw compositional prowess, painting a picture for us just with the movement of the notes, the dynamic swells and contrasts between sustained pads and quick jumpy rhythm lines. At one singular point in the track, we are given the sound of air bubbles rushing past us, which puts it forward that we are underwater, but it's the raw power of the music itself that tells us everything else. It is dark, the sun is barely shining through the marine growth above us. Sea creatures, the creepy kind that you don't see at the surface, mill about, gliding past, glassy-eyed and foreign to us. This track spells out in the language of the soul, fear, not yet acute in our minds, but slow, unrealized, and waiting. Basically, I think I like this track simply because it better conveys how I feel about water levels. I haven't brought it up lately, but my mild phobia of deep water is still alive and thriving, and aquatic ambience is way too relaxing for me. This stuff right here in Waterworld is like best case scenario if I ever had to go through a water level myself. Coming up next on the continuing saga of Donkey Kong Country uses music melded with sound effects to perfectly represent the tone of a level is Bayou Boogie, wherein the DKC series does exactly what I just said it did. It's really easy to point at how unconventional composition tactics that David Wise and company use can make stuff stand out. I mean, I've done that a few times on this list already in so many more words. But Bayou Boogie is not only a perfect example of exactly that, but it's also one of my favorite melodic passages in anything, my favorite mood or tone for composition in general, and even some of my favorite instrumentation to hear in a setting like this. The music is slow and methodical, hypnotizing, far away from any kind of energy. I love to think about all the different directions composers can take with an environment to set to music, and at times those choices come across as the most rewarding part. The melancholy of this whole affair is almost overwhelming. I'm tempted to call this song a lament of sorts. What we are pining over isn't made clear, but the quiet dignity of this swamp we find ourselves in is lifted by the music into a smooth and gentle flight without any kind of a shaky takeoff. This is the kind of piece that you could take a nap to, and I have many times. I listen to this track the way I would listen to a song by a band I like, or a showstopper from a musical. Beyond being an effective backing track for a piece of a video game, this is the kind of raw musical presence that really gets me going. I won't just leave it at, it's a good piece of VGM, I am a straight up fan of this track, and its place on this list is unquestioned in my mind. Fear Factory, the DKC track, not the band, is essentially an exercise in layers. Both of the other tracks I've brought in from DKC 1 so far have been minimalistic and functional rather than thematic. This, on the other hand, is the closest we get to traditional songwriting that I think the DKC 1 soundtrack gets. This song implies nothing but forward motion, beginning with the rapid-fire bass line already established, joined by layers of instruments and percussion one by one until the ultimate theme of the track kicks in, and it's clear what the mood du jour is in this moment, and that is a strong sense of the dramatic. There have been other tracks in this game that have given us the highs and lows of an emotional experience, but rarely, outside of the boss battles, does this game or even this series really indulge in a bombastic display of energy. Pacing in a song is just as important as pacing in a story or film, and if you don't know exactly what I'm talking about, then just listen to this track. The trajectory of the song is almost always pointed in an upwards fashion. The tension created by our constant bass line, punctuated by drums and percussion subdividing its constant energy, is given to a drawn-out, sorrowful melody that swells and ebbs, climbing higher and higher into the dramatic, taking our imagination with it. When we reach the peak of the action, we are given a moment to breathe as the melody backs off and allows us to reflect on what we've just heard, and before too long, it's back. And we mean business. This is exactly the kind of track a level like Oil Drum Alley needs. I've talked before about the uncanny foreign feeling this level portrays, and portrays very well, I might add, and this piece of the soundtrack is unlike anything we've heard thus far. It fits perfectly, and it also fits perfectly at number 3. If there's one thing that cropped up more than anything else in my comments last year, it was the keywords "in a Snowbound Land." More than anything, yes, even more than people complaining that I put Jungle Hijinks as my number 1 favorite level, was that "In a Snowbound Land" from Donkey Kong Country 2 was their favorite track from the DKC soundtracks. I was perfectly aware of this piece last year, and obviously I know it from way back in the when, but oddly enough, this track's true power didn't present itself until after I had separated it from the gameplay it accompanies. This track is hypnotically beautiful, serene, and endlessly relaxing. I often view art as a series of stimuli designed to elicit a raw emotional response or experience in its audience, and In a Snowbound Land is such a perfect example of this that it's almost comical. I can see why people love this track so much. It's definitely the most accessible piece of music in the DKC soundtracks without needing to pull away from the levels it's set to. In its distilled solitary form, it takes on a life of its own, free of any qualifying elements to contextualize its more specific concessions given its purpose, but it still perfectly conveys the environment it comes from. The melodic presence of this song, not to mention its atmosphere, have so much to offer, both in recalling the gameplay that we have heard it paired with, and being a seriously wonderful sleep aid. Seriously, take a nap and just put this song on repeat. You'll be out like a light. Best sleep you'll ever have. I tried really hard not to have this one land at number 1. It's predictable of me and frustratingly on the nose, and people are gonna yell at me because it's an easy pick. And, well, yeah, it's easy because it's obvious. This is the kind of fanfare that you give a game with this pedigree, that has captured the hearts and imaginations of people the world over. This track isn't perfect, it's kind of repetitive, and if I'm honest, I don't really care for the abrasive delay on some of the layers, but damn it if I don't get sent spiraling back into the good old days when I hear those trumpets kick in, those drums start to kick up a fuss. I can't imagine ending a DKC video with anything other than this backing track. If you want to accuse me of picking this for number 1 just so that I can have some dramatic music to finish off the video on, then go ahead. I won't fight it. It's kind of hard to talk about this track layer by layer and piece by piece like I have been with many of the other tracks on this list. Everything about it fits into a very steady, reassuring rhythm. No chaos, no suspense, just pride and accomplishment, satisfaction if you will. The dramatic calls of the trumpets, the piano, and the, whatever that other instrument is supposed to be, are basically just shouts of congratulations over the exhaustion that you and your characters must be feeling. This track isn't just dramatic or nostalgic for me and many others. I think it's perfectly engineered to tell you, good job, you've done something awesome, and having it at the top of a list of favorite DKC tracks is no question in my mind. Hey, hi, another year, another Donkey Kong video, and if you're wondering about honorable mentions or whatever, you can just assume that I would have chosen all of them. Yeah, name a bad track from this series, I dare you. Anyways, I've got lots of videos to make, lots on the way, including that Square video I teased. I promise that's happening. So until then, let me know in the comments what your favorite tracks from DKC are. There's a lot of really great music in this game, and I'd love to hear what you guys think. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you again real soon.